So this morning we're going to be taking a look at Genesis chapter 26, and this is the ongoing story of the promise of God being unfolded in the people of God. And so we've looked at the story of Abraham and how God has taken Abraham from a pagan life, from a pagan world, and He's called him to be the father of many nations. He's done miracles in his life. He's overcome obstacle after obstacle, and He has brought Abraham into this place of fulfillment where he has had a son. His son has now overcome some obstacles. He has gotten a wife, and so today the story moves on from Abraham, and we're looking at Isaac, the son of Abraham. And today we're going to be talking about the dangers of selfishness, the dangers of making things all about us, and the consequences that come from living a life that is focused on ourselves and not on others. You guys ready to dive in? Yeah. Doesn't it sound like it's just a good time today? All right, we're going to be talking about blessing too, all right? But remember, it's not about you. So here we go. Genesis 26, 1 through 5 says, "Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I will tell you. Live in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all of these lands. And I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.'" So here, God is showing up to Isaac, and He is saying to Isaac very similarly what He said to his father Abraham. He is sharing that now the blessing has transferred, this covenant, this agreement has transferred from Abraham and now onto Abraham's son Isaac. And He's reaffirming the purposes, He's reaffirming the plans. I am going to bless you. I am going to multiply you. I'm going to take the little bit that you have and make it into a whole bunch. Anybody in here kind of like promises like that from God? I mean, this is a good promise. But one of the things that we often miss in the promise of God to His people is the why of the promise. And this is found at the very end here in verse 4. He says, "I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and will give to your offspring these lands." But here's the why. "And in your offspring all the nations of the earth will be blessed." In your offspring. Now I'm going to multiply your offspring. I'm going to bless you in ways you can't even imagine. But the reason why I'm going to bless you is so that everybody can be blessed through you. I want you to catch this morning. God will and God wants to bless your life. But the reason that God will bless you is not so that you can have more. It's not so that you can get a bigger house and a fancier car and go on nice vacations. Now, there's nothing wrong with those things, but it's not the reason why the blessing comes. The reason God blesses you is so that you can be a blessing to everybody else. The reason God opens up and pours Himself out on you is so that you can in turn around and pour out and bless on the people around you. And I'm going to share a secret with you. When you stop being a blessing, the spout shuts off. When you start holding it all for you and you start making it all about you, God says, I can't trust Him anymore. And so that blessing, that spout of blessing will get shut off in your life, often in a very hard fashion. I want to show you a couple of things earlier in here. So God comes to Isaac, and they're in the midst of a famine. They're in the midst of a dry season. Now, don't get afraid of dry seasons, because you're going to come into famine seasons of life, right? You're going to come into seasons where things dry out a little bit. You're going to come into seasons of life where things are a little bit more difficult, where there's a little bit more of a struggle. Do not let that push you into terror. Do not let that make you go into a place of fear or in a place of worry, because when you go into that place of fear and worry, you often do things that you regret later on. Anybody understand what I'm talking about? When you're afraid and stressed out and worried, you often do things, you often make decisions that you will later regret because, again, who are you making it about? Yourself. What can I do in this situation? How can I figure this out? How can I provide for myself? And so it's in that me focus that we end up doing things that we regret. So God comes to Isaac and he says, do not go to Egypt. Stay in the land. In other words, don't go running from the problem. Don't go back to that place that you feel safe and secure. Don't go back into that thing that I brought you out of already. Don't go back there. I want you to stay right here and see how I provide for you. Now, if God tells you to go, you go. But if God tells you to stay, even if it's hard, even if it's difficult, then you need to stay, because God has something planned. God is going to take care of you. God is going to make sure that you have what you need. Amen? Galatians 5:1 says, for freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm. Stay where you're at, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Egypt is a dangerous place for the Israelites. And we see again and again and again that they find themselves in Egypt. And sometimes God uses it as a place of blessing. Sometimes God allows them to go through great difficulty when in Egypt. And so now famine has come upon the land again, and Isaac's thinking, got to get to Egypt. Some of you sitting in here right now this morning, if you're being honest with me yourselves, you're being honest with me, you're in a time of famine. And you know what you're wanting to do? You're wanting to go back to Egypt. You're wanting to go back to that addiction. You want to go back to that lifestyle. You want to go back to that relationship. You want to go back to that place of comfort because you've convinced yourself that it's safer and easier there. But God's telling you what he did, Isaac. Don't go looking for Egypt. Stay right here. God didn't set you free just so that you could go back into that thing. He set you free for the sake of freedom. So we go on in the story, Genesis 26, 6 through 11. So Isaac settled in Gerar. And when the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister. For he feared to say, my wife, thinking, lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. Now, I don't know what it is about these guys, but they must be laying in some serious hotties because they're constantly afraid their wives are going to get them killed because they're so attractive. So they must have just been like dating from the supermodel line. I don't know what was going on. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out the window and he saw Isaac laughing. Now in the Hebrew, this word laughing is not, ha ha ha, honey. It's snuggled up in a corner giggling together, if you guys understand that. So Abimelech called Isaac and he said, behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I thought, lest I die because of her. Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Who's Isaac thinking about? Where's his thought patterns dwelling? On himself, right? He listens to God. That's a point in his favor. He does what God tells him to do. He stays in the land where he's supposed to stay because God is rooting him. God is establishing them. They're putting down roots, which is going to be important later on. But when he's in the land, he allows his focus to get on himself instead of on his God who has called him into the land. So maybe you have decided to be obedient to God and you say, I'm going to stand firm right here and I'm not going to let the devil move me. But then with your feet planted right there, you give in to every fear and every thought and everything imaginable, and all of a sudden you're just a mess on the inside. So he stayed put. He didn't go anywhere, but he still made a mess of things staying where he was. Maybe you can relate to that. So here we have again this generational behavior, like father, like son. Abraham, when he was faced with a similar circumstances on 2 different occasions, threw his wife under the bus and said, she's my sister, because he didn't want to die. Now Isaac, in a similar situation. Now I don't know if he's heard about this story from dad, or if he's heard about it from some other folks, or maybe this is just a generational iniquity. It's a spiritual thing that got passed on in the DNA. I don't know. But when Isaac is faced with the same situation, Isaac does the very same behavior. Do you know what it means to be stuck in a rut? The men of this family are in a rut. They are in a spiritual rut. That when things get hard, the fear takes over and they start saying things that aren't true. And you know, this is how deception often works. Many of us don't set out to deceive people. Many of us don't set out to do evil. Many of us don't set out to be selfish and self-focused and self-centered. But because of fear, we become internalized, and it just becomes about me. I no longer worry about the consequences of my decisions because I'm going to do anything in my power to keep my head above water. The only problem with that line of thinking is that you think you're the one that's going to keep your head above water. And it's not about me. It's about the God who told me to stay here. It's about the God who said that He would take care of me right here where I'm at. Maybe you're in the worst job you've ever been and God's not releasing you to leave. Guess what? There's a reason for that. Because He's got something He wants to accomplish right there. Maybe you're married to somebody that is driving you absolutely crazy, and all you think about is the devil keeps putting these lies in your head about how green the grass is in everybody else's field, and you think, man, if I could just get out of this situation, I would be happier. Guess what? God hasn't called you to go nowhere, so don't leave the field, because God wants to bless the field you're in if you let Him. So Isaac lies. There's a problem with lying. You know what it is? You're always going to get found out. I don't care how good of a liar you are. It's coming out at some point. Proverbs 10:9 says, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. You don't get to lie and get away with it, especially if you belong to Jesus. If you belong to the world, then you belong to the father of lies, and it becomes your native tongue. But when you belong to Jesus and you start deceiving or you start lying out of a selfish, self-focused place, you're going to get found out every single time. So Abimelech calls him out on this. He goes, what were you thinking? What were you doing here? Why did you think this was okay behavior? You're trying to save your own neck. Number one, we didn't want to touch your wife. If she was single, we thought we might have a shot, but we didn't want to touch your wife. You could have destroyed us, you selfish jerk. I mean, that's the Tanner paraphrase, but that's how I would have said it to him, right? You're so worried about yourself that you didn't even care about what you might have done to an entire nation. There's that word. Why is this a problem? What has Isaac been called to be? Isaac has been called to be a blessing to the nations. Isaac's life, the purpose of his life is to be blessed so that he can be a blessing. Isaac has been blessed, but is he being a blessing by being a deceiver, by being a liar? You've been blessed with a relationship. You've been blessed with a job. You've been blessed with whatever. Are you being a blessing in that situation, or are you being a jerk? Are you fulfilling the promise of God on your life by being a blessing where you're at, or are you making things worse for yourself and everyone else? This is the problem, is we are children of blessing. But the blessing gets cut off when we stop being a blessing to everybody else around us. The story continues. Genesis 26:12 says, so Isaac sowed in that land, and he reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him. See, God keeps his end of the promise. And the man became rich, and he gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had begun filling up, they had begun stopping up and filling with earth all of the wells that his father's servants had dug up in the days of Abraham, his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, you are much mightier than we. There's a problem here. Isaac's called to be a blessing. When you're a blessing, when someone's a blessing to you, do you tell them to get away from you? Why do you tell somebody to get lost? Because you don't trust them? Because you think they might hurt you? Because you think that they may not be good for you? So you say, get away from me. So here Abimelech is telling Isaac, I want you to get lost. I want you to get away. You're too mighty for us. Where is this coming from? This is coming from a place of knowing that Isaac is a deceiver. Isaac isn't a blessing. Isaac isn't somebody that you want around. In fact, the more this guy increases, the more Abimelech's starting to worry. What else is he going to do to me? He was willing to lie and to destroy my entire nation. If he becomes more powerful, what could this guy possibly do to me? Is that the rep we want? Is that the rep we want as promise bearers? Should that be the reputation that we carry with us as promise bearers? That, you know what? Man, the better off that guy does. Oh, man, Jeremiah just got another promotion at work. I don't want anything to do with that jerk. So glad that he's getting benefited. A lot of good it does me, because the more he gets promoted, the bigger of a jerk he is to me. You see, the things that we do, Jeremiah, that's not true. Everybody knows that's not true. Jeremiah is a promise bearer. And he understands this because Jeremiah is a blessing at his workplace. He is a blessing wherever he goes. You know, one of the things that cracked me up is every time I ever went into Chick-fil-A when Jeremiah worked there, I'd be like, hey, is Jeremiah working? You know Jeremiah? I love that guy. I'd be like, yeah, he goes to my church. I'm his pastor. I like him too. You want to come and be with him on Sunday? That's a blessing. There have been other times where I walked into a place and be like, hey, do you know so-and-so? And they're like, I hate that guy. Yeah, I know, he goes to Calvary. I don't know. I'm kidding. I love Pastor Tim Bowman, all right? That was a joke. As promise bearers, we need to have that reputation. We need to live our lives in a way that they want us around. Isaac's been deceptive. He's been a jerk. So they don't want him. They're not celebrating the fact that he's getting better and doing better. They just want him away because they don't know what him doing better might mean for them, because now everything they see is through a lens of negativity. And maybe, just maybe, you've got some people in your life that maybe aren't so fond of you because of who you've been and or what you've done, and so maybe they just view you through a lens and a filter of negativity, and they don't see you as a blessing. But when you start getting blessed, they see you as a curse because they see you as taking away from them. Maybe it's not true. Maybe people are just coming at you for no good reason. But we have to be careful that as promise bearers, we don't make it about us. Because Isaac's responsibility here as God was blessing him was to be a light. As God was blessing Isaac, he should have been a blessing to everybody else, because here's the point of being a promise bearer. As people see God's light shining on you, you get to reflect that light of God into other people's lives and say, see, come and get some. You want peace? Come and get some. You want forgiveness? Come and get some. You want hope, you want joy, you want love, you want goodness, come and get some, because God's goodness is shining all over me, and I will reflect it so that you can see it and you can come have some for yourself. That's a promise bearer. That is the responsibility of a promise bearer. Galatians 6, 7 through 10 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially those who are of the household of faith." We're going to reap what we sow. Guess what? Isaac was deceptive. As he started getting blessed by God, guess what? The people that he deceived started stopping up his wells. Now, you guys know this, I have started working on a master's degree, and right now I am in an Old Testament theology class being taught by an observant Messianic Orthodox Jew, which means this guy really knows the Old Testament. And so I asked him, I said, Dr. Ederle, what is the significance of a well, of digging a well? Because all through these chapters in Genesis, it talks about digging well, digging well, digging well. And he said to me, the significance is strong in the Jewish understanding. Because when you dig a well, you are claiming possession. When you dig a well, you are claiming an inheritance. When you dig a well, you are saying, I belong here, and this belongs to me. So as they're coming behind him and they're filling in the wells that Abraham has dug, what they're saying is that what Abraham had claimed, they're erasing. And this is coming, I believe, as a direct result of the way he lived among them. Because if he would have been a blessing, I think they would have been helping him dig more wells, because they would have wanted him around. But because he's been a deceiver, because he has threatened their security, because he has not been a blessing to them, they're trying to erase him from among them. The more opportunity we have to be a blessing where we are, where God has planted us, people are going to want us to stay. And they're going to join with us in the work. They're going to join alongside of us. They're going to seek to be part of it with us. Genesis 26:17. It says, "So Isaac departed from there, and he encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug up in the days of Abraham, his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham." Anybody in here feel like you're constantly having to dig out holes that you've already dug? You ever feel like you're just constantly working the same place? You get it undug, you turn around, it's filled back in. Anybody in here relate to that? And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also, so he called its name Sitnah. And they moved on from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." I think this is extremely important, because Isaac's been cast out. He's been told to get lost because they are now jealous of him. So he goes and he starts to dig new wells. And God's with him. God is blessing him. And he comes upon a new well of water and he's like, "Success!" But because he has not been a blessing, because he has been a deceiver, the people of that land, instead of rejoicing with his victory, they claim it for their own. Because now they're going to get theirs while they can, because they don't trust him to be a blessing to them. So they come and say, no, that's ours, and they quarrel over it. So Isaac literally names the well to quarrel. He goes on from there and he digs another well. Now this is interesting. The word Sitnah in Hebrew is the same root word that we get Satan. It means accusation. So now Isaac has been planting and he has been sowing, but it hasn't just been physical. Now he's reaping. He's reaping some of the spiritual seeds that he's sown with his deception. And the work of his hands become quarrel and they become accusation. Maybe you can kind of relate to that this morning. That you feel like everything you do is a fight, it's a quarrel, that the world is coming at you, and you're getting all these accusations. Satan is just calling you out, he's calling you names, and he's telling lies about you, and you just feel like everything is against you. Now, I want you to see Isaac's response here. You see, the first time he dug the well and they came and called it his, he had become bigger than them. He could have rose up and cast them out. He could have rose up and shoved them off. He could have taken possession of it by force. But Isaac, he's starting to learn. And so he walks away from it. He says, okay, I'm going to trust God. And he goes and he digs another well. And you know what? This time they come and they do the very same thing. And at this point, if you're anything like me, I'm like, all right, I let you have one. Now I'm going to stomp you. Right? Anybody in here kind of get that attitude sometimes of, I'll let you mess with me one time, but 2 times you're going to get the mean person. I know, Kay, I know you're looking at me like that never happened to me ever, right? But Isaac relents. And I think what's beginning to happen here is that through this process, God is doing a work in Isaac's heart. Because Isaac's coming to this place of understanding that it's not about him. It's not about what he can have. It's not about what he can take. It's not about him. Because by giving up the well, what is Isaac actually doing? He's being a blessing. Because he's providing water to these people that he has deceived. Not just once, but twice. And guess what, guys? There are going to be times in your life where God is blessing you and someone else is going to step in there and try to take it from you. And you know what your response should be to them? Death! No. Let's look at Jesus says. Luke 6, 27 through 36. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from the one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from the one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, so do to them. Keep going. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Can't do it. I can't do that. I can't. I cannot do that. But He can. And thankfully, there was a day in my life where I humbled myself and realized that I couldn't do it. And I asked Jesus to forgive me of my sins, to be merciful toward me. And I asked Him to give me what was not mine to have. I asked Him to give me what I did not deserve, which was forgiveness and grace. And God, out of His abundance, gave me grace that I did not deserve. And out of that grace, He saved me and He put His Spirit inside of me. And so now it is not me doing these things, it is the Jesus inside of me. So I cannot do it, but He can do it because He has shown me and given me what I did not deserve, so I can do the same for others. And so it says that on the third try, he digs a well. And it says that they do not try to take it from him. And Isaac recognizes, all right, now I can prosper. Just because you are working, just because you are accomplishing, just because you are building and you're not seeing any immediate results, does not mean that God is not blessing. Maybe He's using you to be a blessing to the other people around you, and He's getting ready to open up the land before you. This is what's going on here with Isaac. In Genesis 26:23, it goes on and says, from there Isaac went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. Do you see the difference? Do you see any differences here between the first time God appeared to Isaac and gave him the promise and the second time he appeared and gave him a promise? The difference is in Isaac's response. You see, the first time that God gave Isaac the promise, he just dove in, he put up his tents, and he started lying to the locals. This time, God gives him the promise. He's learned something. Because he's gone through some times of difficulty. He's gone through a time of quarrel. He's gone through a time of accusation. And now that he's come to realize that God has given him blessing in the land, this time when God shows up and reminds him, you are a promise bearer, Isaac, instead of going on with life, he stops. He builds an altar. And in Jewish thinking, when you build an altar, that means to give your heart and your soul fully over to God. So he stops what he's doing and he recognizes where the blessing is coming from. And some of us here today, before we leave this place, we need to come and we need to stop and we need to realize where the blessing, where the promise is coming from, and give him credit and give him glory. Isaac stops and he calls on the name of the Lord. This changes things. You see, when you realize that you're a promise bearer, not for your sake, but to be a blessing to others, and you give yourself wholly to God, you build that altar to the Lord, you call upon His name, you're not going to do it for yourself. It's not going to be about you. It's going to be about God. And I love this because what does it say? It says he pitches his tent there and he digs a well. He claims possession. He claims the promise of God. But he only claims the promise of God after he recognizes God. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. He has called upon the name of his God. He has built an altar to his God, and he has pitched his tent. He has said, I am not going anywhere. I don't care what the devil tries. I don't care what the world tries. I'm staying where God has told me to stay. Genesis 26:26, the fulfillment. It says, so Abimelech went up to him from Gerar with Ahuzeth. Aren't you glad we don't have these names? Can you imagine him in kindergarten? Okay, Ahuzeth, can you spell your name? Nobody can. I mean, come on. Seriously. He's the advisor and Phicol, the commander of his army. Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you? They said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us. In other words, we don't trust you. And let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have not done to you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. You are the promise bearer. So he made them a feast, and they ate and they drank. He gives hospitality. In the morning, they rose early, they exchanged oaths. Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That, guys, you got to see this. That same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had just dug and said, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of that city is Beersheba to this day. What's the significance of this? Well, the first time God gives the promise, Isaac only cares about himself. And because he only cares about himself, he deceives his neighbors. Well, because of that deception, they no longer trust him. They no longer see him as a bearer of blessing. They see him as a curse to them, so they send him away from them. Well, God continues to bless Isaac. They come and they take 2 of his wells from him, and instead of Isaac continuing to be selfish and self-absorbed and all about himself and fighting and attacking them because they have taken these wells from him, Isaac allows it to happen. He stays calm. He is not selfish. He allows himself to be a blessing, even if it's not on purpose. He does not attack. He loves his enemies. And God continues to increase him and bless him. And so these same guys that have told him to leave, they come to their senses. They're observing his life. They're watching his life. And they go, man, there's just something. This guy has God's hands all over him. The fingerprints of God are all over this Isaac. We've got to go and we've got to make an agreement with him. And so they come to Isaac. And Isaac blesses, he offers hospitality, he gives of himself, and he enters into this agreement with them. But what's he doing? He's fulfilling the promise. Instead of being selfish and self-centered, Isaac is giving of himself. He's offering protection. He's offering himself to these people, and he's becoming a blessing. The very purpose for which God has blessed him. He's fulfilling it this time. And what happens? What happens immediately after Isaac fulfills his purpose to be a blessing? His servants come rushing in. They say, Isaac, you won't believe it. You know that well we were digging? We found water. Why did they find water this time? Because he was living out the promise. He was fulfilling the blessing. And when you fulfill the blessing, you're going to strike it every single time. Your well is going to hit water, and you're going to have what you need. But if you keep it about yourselves, you're going to constantly be pushed away and pushed away and pushed away. But when you make a decision to be a blessing, people are going to come to you. They're going to recognize God in you, and they're going to want to be connected to you. And God's going to continue to pour out blessing on your life so that you can be a blessing. 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, "For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward Him." God is just looking. He is just looking for a good investment who He can get behind and support and bless because He knows that they are with Him and for Him and going to do what He wants them to do. Philippians 2:4 says, "Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interests of others." You are a promise bearer. Bear the promise. Bear the blessing. Take it with you everywhere you go and pour it out everywhere you go. The book of wisdom, Proverbs 11:25 says, "Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and the one who waters will himself be watered." You know how I know this is true? Because right here in this story, Isaac blesses. And what does God give him? Water. water in the well. Water in the well. Isaac gets over himself and he becomes the bearer of blessing, and God waters him. This is the promise of God for us. That if we will not live our lives for ourselves, but if we will get our focus and attention off of us and onto being a blessing around us, God will bless in ways that we can't even imagine. Can I share something else with you too? I'm just going to talk to you then. I like you, Mary. You're awesome. Depression, fear, anxiety, disappointment, frustration, anger, rage, all of those things begin to melt away when we get our focus on being a blessing. Because those things accumulate when all we can see is ourselves. But when our eyes get off of us and they get on to others, that stuff just begins to melt away. Because it's not about us. It's about Him. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? The Lord wants to water you this morning. The Lord wants to bless you this morning so that you can walk out of this place and go be a blessing outside of the four walls of this church. And so this morning, our prayer team, they're standing up here at the front right now. They're making their way down, and they're going to be up here. If we can pray for you about anything, would you please make a decision to get up from where you're at and run down here? Because here's the thing. This morning, you're going to receive, but you're not going to receive for yourself. You're going to receive so that you can go and tell someone else what God has done so that you can bring them next time so they can get from Jesus. You're going to come and receive this morning so that when the Lord answers your prayer, you can take that testimony and you can pray for someone else and share with them what God has done in your life. Can we receive from the Lord this morning so that we can take it and give to others? Amen? Let's stand to our feet and let's receive from the Lord.